The German calculations. August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht headquarters, East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl sat inside Hitler's Wolfschanz command bunker, reviewing grim reports from the collapsing Western Front. The Allied breakout from Normandy had shattered German defenses, and now George Patton's U.S. Third Army was advancing at a pace no one had imagined possible. Yet Jodl was calm. He had studied the numbers. American armored divisions were moving 400 miles from their supply bases. He knew from experience that such speed was unsustainable. An armored division, he reminded his staff, consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel every single day on the advance. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily, an armored division nearly 1,000. Patton commanded 12 divisions across a 60-mile front. That meant 12,000 tons of supplies every day, hauled across a shattered French road network the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. The conclusion seemed inescapable. Patton would soon run out of fuel. Within days, perhaps even hours, the American advance would grind to a halt. The Wehrmacht could then regroup along the Seine, stabilize the front, and maybe even hold until winter. What Jodl and his staff did not know was that just 125 miles away, nearly 6,000 U.S. Army trucks were already on the move. Headlights blazing in defiance of military doctrine, they carried over 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. It was a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had never even considered it possible. The Allies called it the Red Ball Express, a one-way highway system of trucks that would soon fuel Patton's blitzkrieg, liberate Paris in a week, and bring American tanks to Germany's border within a month. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were about to receive a devastating lesson. In modern war, victory did not belong to the side with the boldest tactics, but to the side with the best logistics. The Red Ball Express Plan. August 25, 1944. A requisition chateau near Le Mans, France. Inside a dimly lit room, U.S. logistics officers argued over charts and fuel tables. The numbers were brutal. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history. Ammunition, food, spare parts, and above all gasoline, thousands of tons every single day. Traditional methods had collapsed. Rail lines were wrecked. Bridges were blown. Depot-to-depot distribution was too slow. If nothing changed, Patton's spearhead would run dry within 48 hours. Then a lieutenant colonel named Laurent Ayres from a motor transport service stood up. His voice cut through the skepticism in the room. "Gentlemen, we're going to do something different. We'll build a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches straight to the front lines. Trucks will run 20 hours out of every 24. No stopping except for fuel or emergencies. Our goal is 12,500 tons every single day. Minimum." The name for this audacious gamble came from American railroads. A Red Ball freight train meant absolute priority. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle. No delays, no exceptions, no excuses. The plan broke every rule in the book. 2 parallel one-way routes, one for loaded trucks moving forward, one for empty trucks heading back. Convoys at 5-minute intervals, headlights blazing through the night, abandoning blackout discipline. Mobile repair units stationed every 50 miles to keep broken trucks from clogging the roads. Military police checkpoints, ensuring that any vehicle falling below 25 miles per hour was pulled off immediately. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commander of the Advanced Section Communications Zone, stared at the figures. "We'll need 140 truck companies. At least 5,958 vehicles running at 90% availability. Gentlemen, by every logistics textbook ever written, this is impossible." Yet within 36 hours, the impossible became reality. On August 26, 1944, soldiers of the 3,916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC deuce-and-a-half trucks loaded with artillery shells and gasoline cans. Engines roared, convoys formed, and the Red Ball Express rolled east, a river of steel and rubber carrying the lifeblood of Patton's army. Unseen by German generals making their neat calculations, the greatest logistics experiment of the war had just begun: drivers, convoys, and first contact. They called it a highway, but moved like a river. From Cherbourg and the Norman beaches, trucks poured onto the Red Ball routes, nose to tail, 5-minute gaps, day and night, without pause. Headlights burned through blackout hours, a deliberate dare to doctrine. The drivers. The lifeblood of the system was 23,000 truckers, about three-quarters African-American, serving in a segregated army that rarely let them carry rifles, yet now trusted them with the fate of an entire campaign. They climbed into their GMC CCKW Deuce-and-a-half workhorses and made the line move. Within hours, a culture formed. Slogans hand-painted on hoods and doors: Patton's Blood Bank, Detroit to Berlin Express, Hitler, here we come. Field rules, simple and ruthless. If you're slow, pull off. If you break down, push it into the ditch. If you can't hit 25 miles per hour, you're a roadblock. A code of favors: spare coffee for a sleepless buddy, a cannibalized fan bell traded for a full jerrycan, a joke at 0-300 to keep someone awake another mile. They ran 20 hours out of 24. Benzedrine tablets passed hand to hand. Faces hollowed out, eyes wired, hands black with grease and dust. Accidents were the cost of speed, rollovers on cratered roads, brakes fading on French hills, fires from overheated engines. Some never made a home. Most simply tightened the straps on their loads and rolled on. The convoys. Each column was a system inside the system. Lead scout, pace truck, line of haulers, wrecker at the rear. Military police checkpoints clipped the flow, stopwatches out, thermoses steaming, flagging any truck that fell below rate. Mobile maintenance teams waited every 50 miles like pit crews in a race, 15 minutes to fix, if not, off the road. Engines were swapped curbside by crane. Parts came from organ donors, deadline trucks stripped in minutes to keep the living moving. Fuel itself had its own choreography. Tankers leapfrogged the line. Forward dumps appeared every few dozen miles, drums stacked like city walls, no truck waiting more than 10 minutes to top off. It felt reckless. It was engineered audacity. First German eyes. From hedgerows and church towers, German reconnaissance watched and tried to make sense of it. Reports crackled back to headquarters. Continuous column. Headlights visible 20 kilometers. No spacing. No blackout. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans ignore all rules. Generals who had built doctrine on concealment and conservation saw something else entirely: volume as armor. The Americans did not hide their logistics. They overwhelmed the battlefield with it. A single stalled truck did not stop a convoy. 5,000 others were already in motion. Where German planners preserved vehicles like heirlooms, the Red Ball treated trucks as expendable parts of an unstoppable machine. On the road, the drivers made their own small rebellions against the war's ugliness. In town after town, kids gathered by the roadside. Chocolate bars and Lucky Strikes arced from cabs to outstretched hands. French families learned to read the convoys by smell and sound: hot oil, cordite dust, the metronome thrum of inline-six engines. The line taught its own math: 5 tons a truck, 67 trucks a convoy, a new column every 5 minutes. Keep the average speed. Keep the interval. Keep Patton moving. And through it all, pride. The men knew exactly what they were proving: about America, about themselves, about the enemy who said they could not do what they were doing right now at 35 miles an hour. The numbers that broke doctrine. The Germans trusted mathematics. They had pioneered blitzkrieg, and they knew its fatal flaw: logistics. Their own offensives had died in Russia not from Soviet fire, but from empty tanks and broken trucks. So they did the math for Patton's advance. A Sherman tank burned half a mile per gallon on the road, worse cross-country. An infantry division consumed 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division, nearly 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions across a 60-mile front, 12,000 tons a day minimum. Distance from depots, 400 miles of wrecked French roads. The German staff wrote the conclusion in stone. Patton had 48 hours left. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. Then the Red Ball Express violated them anyway. The first week, August 25th to 31st, 1944. 89,939 tons delivered, average of 12,848 tons every day. 5,958 trucks on the line, each hauling 5 tons or more. 686 miles round trip for each convoy. Over 300,000 gallons of gasoline consumed by the Express itself just to keep moving. German intelligence intercepted the figures and dismissed them as propaganda. But reconnaissance confirmed them. Convoys every 5 minutes. Columns stretching to the horizon. The impossible was now routine. How they did it? The numbers looked irrational by German standards because the Americans played by different rules. Planned waste. They assumed 30% mechanical attrition daily and just built around it. A broken truck became a roadside parts depot. Volume over concealment. Headlights on, no spacing, no camouflage. Safety traded for speed. Redundancy as doctrine. 5,000 vehicles rolling meant 1,000 could vanish without consequence. Repairs by triage. 15 minutes on the roadside. If not fixed, push it into the ditch. The line never stopped for one man, one truck, or one failure. German reaction. From concealed positions, General Lieutenant Edgar Feutinger of the 21st Panzer Division watched the convoys flow. His report to Army Group B admitted disbelief. They operate a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass every 30 seconds, day and night. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't obey any rules we understand. Is not military science. Is mass production applied to war? For the first time, German commanders began to grasp the scale of American power. They were not fighting an army. They were fighting an industry. Momentum. The tonnage only grew. By early September, with convoys at full rhythm, a truck left the western terminus every 5 minutes, day and night. Each convoy, 67 vehicles on average. Each driver, 20 hours on the road daily, often hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine. Maintenance crews swapped entire engines in 45 minutes, parts cannibalized from the roadside dead. What doctrine said should collapse was accelerating. The Red Ball Express was not a fragile supply line. It was a river of steel that no calculation could stop. Fuel, Pluto, and industrial overflow. If supplies were the bloodstream of Patton's Third Army, fuel was its oxygen. Without gasoline, no truck rolled, no tank advanced, no artillery fired. German generals assumed this immutable law would halt the Americans as surely as it had halted them outside Moscow. But they underestimated American industry's capacity to drown problems in abundance. The Red Ball's own appetite. The Express itself devoured fuel like a hungry beast. 300,000 gallons every day just to move its own trucks. More gasoline burned hauling gasoline than the entire Wehrmacht allocated to some panzer divisions. Forward dumps every 25 miles, stacks of jerrycans and drums larger than German strategic reserves. To the Germans, this was lunacy. To the Americans, it was arithmetic. Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean. While German analysts calculated truck tonnage, the Allies were already pumping gasoline across the English Channel. Flexible pipelines, unseen, unsuspected, snaked under the seabed from England to the beaches of Normandy. By September 1944, fuel flowed directly into French depots at a rate no convoy alone could sustain. German intelligence never even detected it. A marvel of engineering operated beneath their noses, a secret river of fuel feeding the Red Ball's arteries. Parallel convoys. Tanker trucks ran their own endless routes, leapfrogging supply points, ensuring no hauler ever idled for lack of gas. Refueling took minutes. A truck rolled in nearly empty, rolled out full, and rejoined the column without pause. German observers. From aerial reconnaissance, General Major Walter Warlimont stared at photographs of American fuel depots. What he saw dwarfed imagination. The Americans have dumps larger than our entire reserves. They burn more fuel-moving gasoline than we allocate to whole armies. This is not war. This is industrial overflow. The strategic shock. Fuel had always been warfare's ultimate limiter. Every army in history had bent to it. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg had collapsed in Russia not for lack of will, but for lack of gasoline. Now the Americans seemed to have abolished that constraint altogether. Convoys roared through day and night, headlights on, tanks full, drums stacked higher than church spires. The fuel was endless, the movement unstoppable. What it meant? For Patton's spearheads, it translated into freedom. Tanks that could advance 40 to 60 miles a day instead of 20. Artillery that fired without rationing. Trucks that rolled even when their engines drank more fuel in a week than a German battalion might see in a month. The Germans had counted on physics to save them. Instead, they watched industrial America break physics with sheer volume. The sound of logistics. For German soldiers along the front, the Red Ball Express was more than a supply line. It was a sound, a constant, grinding, mechanical thunder that rolled through the night. In hedgerows and ruined villages, Wehrmacht infantry lay awake, counting engines. A single convoy could stretch for 20 kilometers, headlights burning like a serpent of fire. To the exhausted, hungry men on the receiving end, it felt infinite. Psychological warfare by accident. American planners hadn't meant it this way, but the convoys themselves became a weapon. German reports described Endless motors all night, every night. No concealment, no silence. Americans fear nothing. A supply system without weakness, overwhelming by volume. Some units swore they heard trucks that weren't there. Phantom convoys became a common entry in German diaries. The sound itself broke morale as effectively as artillery. A contrast too sharp to ignore. German riflemen often received only 3 rounds per day. American infantry had mountains of ammunition, millions of rounds delivered at 35 miles an hour. German artillery rationed shells by the dozen. American gunners fired hundreds of thousands in a single day, Red Ball trucks delivering a surplus before the last barrage ended. The message was unmistakable. While the Wehrmacht scraped the bottom of its barrels, the Americans seemed to drown in abundance. American PSYOP exploits it. Psychological warfare officers quickly realized the value of this unintended weapon. Loudspeakers hidden in the lines began broadcasting recordings of truck engines toward German positions when no convoy was present. Soldiers reported them as real. Morale sagged further. Captured testimony. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, admitted under interrogation. "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. The sound of your convoys was worse than your artillery. It meant more was always coming. We had no answer." For the drivers. On the American side, the sound carried a different meaning. For the men behind the wheel, young, often black, often denied dignity at home, it was the music of achievement. Every gear shift and every engine roar was proof that they were defeating Hitler not with rifles, but with relentless motion. The frontline experience. At night, Red Ball trucks thundered east while retreating Germans fell back west. To villagers liberated in the dark, the convoys meant hope. Children lined roads to wave. Drivers tossed chocolate and soap. For French civilians, the sound of trucks meant the war was turning. The Wehrmacht, once proud master of mechanized warfare, was now haunted by the endless echo of American engines. The Red Ball Express had turned logistics into psychological dominance. Human cost and heroism. The Red Ball Express was a triumph of logistics, but was paid for in sweat, blood, and sleepless eyes. Behind the staggering numbers were 23,000 drivers, most of them African American, pushing their limits in ways no manual had prepared them for. Exhaustion without end. Convoys rolled 20 hours a day. Drivers popped Benzedrine tablets to stay awake, their hands trembling as they clenched the wheel. Some hallucinated, phantom figures on the road, lights that weren't there, trucks that weren't real. Accidents were constant. Rollovers on muddy French lanes. Trucks slamming into each other in fog. Engines catching fire from overheated brakes. By the end of the operation, 300 men had died on the Red Ball roads. Many more carried scars of wrecks, burns, or sheer exhaustion. Yet they kept going. What kept them driving was more than orders. For many black drivers, this was their war, the chance to prove themselves in a military that still segregated them, doubted them, and denied them equality at home. Every mile they drove was a defiance of both Nazi ideology and American prejudice. They painted their trucks with bravado. Hitler's Nightmare, Patton's Blood Bank, Harlem to Berlin Express. They joked that they were Patton's true cavalry, keeping his tanks fed with blood, gas, and bullets. Stories of grit. The records are full of small acts of impossible determination. Corporal John L. Houston drove nearly 48 hours straight, dozing at the wheel 3 times, revived by comrades pounding on his cab, but still delivering his load of ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division. Private Booker T. Washington watched his brakes overheat and his truck catch fire while hauling medical supplies. Protocol said abandon it. Instead, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, leaping clear as flames reached the cab. His cargo saved lives. Countless unnamed drivers, when trucks failed, cannibalized engines roadside in the dark, trading parts like battlefield surgeons and rolling again before dawn. Morale and pride. Despite fatigue and casualties, morale stayed remarkably high. Drivers shared rations with French civilians, threw candy to children, sang songs in convoys, and invented road slang only they understood. They knew they were writing history. The irony. German officers observing the Red Ball noted the irony with bitter fascination. Nazi racial theory had declared black soldiers incapable of technical tasks. Yet it was African American truckers who sustained the most advanced logistics operation of the war, an achievement German forces could not even imagine replicating. Eisenhower saw it. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower visited Red Ball operations in September 1944. He watched exhausted black drivers stagger out of trucks, grease-streaked and hollow-eyed, still smiling, still joking. Turning to his aide, he admitted, "These men are winning the war as surely as any rifleman. We need to reconsider many things." German attempts to counter the Red Ball Express. The Wehrmacht had seen logistics collapse before its own. In Russia, its spearheads had frozen for lack of fuel and spare parts. German generals expected the same fate to overtake Patton's Third Army. When it didn't, desperation set in. Reconnaissance reports. By late August 1944, reconnaissance units reported the impossible. Convoys every 5 minutes. Columns visible for 20 kilometers, headlights blazing. An estimated 1,000 vehicles an hour. General Major Seafried Westphal calculated that even if the Americans had unlimited trucks, perfect roads, and no mechanical failures, an impossibility, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance beyond 48 hours. Yet the Red Ball Express kept accelerating. The German mindset. Doctrine emphasized. Concealment at night. Careful spacing to avoid bottlenecks. Vehicle conservation above all else. The Americans violated every principle. They ran headlights nose to tail. They pushed broken trucks into ditches. They accepted 30% daily mechanical attrition and still kept rolling. To German officers raised on efficiency, it looked like chaos. But chaos that worked. The Luftwaffe question. Some staff officers suggested interdiction from the air. The answer was bitter. The Luftwaffe no longer had enough planes, fuel, or pilots to strike thousands of targets spread across hundreds of miles. Even if they destroyed 1,000 trucks, American factories would replace them in a week. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt admitted bluntly, "They have 6,000 trucks. We would need to destroy 200 daily to slow them. We no longer possess 200 aircraft in the West. The problem has no military solution." Operation Greif. During the Ardennes offensive later in 1944, the Germans tried to imitate the concept. Captured American trucks were repainted and pressed into service. But the effort collapsed immediately. German drivers couldn't match American speed. German mechanics lacked the parts and training to maintain U.S. vehicles. German fuel stocks were too thin to support such consumption. An officer reported in disgust, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. The Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." Engineering versus improvisation. Where German engineers calculated replacement bridges in 6 weeks, American engineers built one in 14 hours while convoys detoured on bulldozed bypasses. Where Germans spent months planning railheads, Americans improvised new express routes overnight. White ball, green diamond, red lion. Signs painted, trucks reassigned, and the wheels turned. The lesson. For the Wehrmacht, the Red Ball Express revealed a horrifying truth. They were not fighting an army bound by the same limitations. They were fighting a civilization that treated trucks, fuel, and even human endurance as expendable resources in a machine too vast to stop. The industrial avalanche. The Red Ball Express did not survive because it was efficient. It survived because America had the power to bury inefficiency under mountains of replacements. Mechanical attrition. By September 1944, the statistics were staggering. Average vehicle lifespan on Red Ball duty, 10,000 miles, 1/3 normal. 30% of trucks sidelined daily for breakdowns. 500 engines replaced each week. 10,000 tires consumed every week. By October, over 5,000 trucks destroyed or abandoned. For any other army, this would have meant paralysis. For the Americans, it barely registered. Replacements without pause. Ships arrived weekly at French ports carrying hundreds of brand-new trucks. Deadlined vehicles became roadside organ donors, stripped of axles, transmissions, carburetors, until only empty shells remained. Replacement drivers, some barely trained, were shoved behind wheels after 2 days' instruction. A convoy lost 20 trucks? The next morning it rolled again, filled out with factory-fresh vehicles that had crossed the Atlantic faster than German staff officers could redraw their maps. German calculations fail again. Captured documents showed German officers trying to measure the madness. Americans consume more trucks in a week than we possess in all France. They waste vehicles, fuel, and men in ways that would bankrupt us. Yet their capacity grows instead of shrinking. Field Marshal Walter Model admitted bitterly, "We face not an army, but a society at war. They can afford to waste what we must preserve." Their losses increased their momentum. Infrastructure built overnight. While trucks burned out by the thousands, U.S. Army engineers expanded the lifeline. 40 bridges rebuilt or reinforced. 15 major fuel depots established. 26 maintenance stations created. 8 temporary cities built to house drivers. All of it raised in weeks, temporary, ugly, functional. By the time German intelligence mapped one depot, another had already sprung up further east. Industrial war made visible. For the first time, German officers began to grasp the real difference. They had built a war machine on scarcity, careful planning, conservation, discipline. The Americans built theirs on excess, planned waste, rapid replacement, mass production. Where the Wehrmacht prized craftsmanship, the Red Ball Express thrived on redundancy. The Germans repaired, the Americans replaced, and the avalanche rolled on. The battlefield impact. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a logistics experiment, it was the engine of Patton's Blitz. Its effect on the battlefield was immediate, visible, and terrifying to the enemy. Patton's tempo. German doctrine assumed an armored force could advance 20 to 30 miles a day at best. Mechanical fatigue, fuel limits, and ammunition rationing made more impossible. But with the Red Ball Express feeding him, Patton shattered every assumption. September 1, 1944, the U.S. 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles before noon, halted for resupply, and then advanced another 32 miles by nightfall. Divisions averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks, twice the German theoretical maximum. Tanks rolled into towns still smoking from the previous day's artillery barrages, supplied, fueled, and ready for more. Unlimited firepower. At Metz, U.S. artillery unleashed a storm unimaginable to German officers. 100,000 rounds fired in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every shell, plus surplus for the next day. German gunners, rationed to 50 rounds per gun, could barely reply. One officer admitted, "We did not face American artillery. We faced American factories." Fuel is freedom. Shermans never idled for want of gasoline. Tankers shadowed spearheads, filling cans at roadside, fueling columns mid-march. German panzer crews often abandoned their machines for lack of fuel. American crews joked their only limit was how fast they could burn it. German disbelief. Reports filtered back to East Prussia. General Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg, refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failure alone prevents it. This must be propaganda. But intercepted U.S. radio traffic confirmed the truth. Even more astonishing, Americans transmitted positions in the open, without codes, supremely confident that they could outrun any German reaction. The strategic shockwave. Every German plan to regroup hinged on one assumption, that the Americans would culminate their advance outrunning supply. The Red Ball Express destroyed that assumption. There was no culmination, no pause, no respite. In a single month, the Red Ball delivered Patton to the German border. Paris fell in a week. German defenses, designed to slow armies strangled by logistics, crumbled before armies drowning in supplies. The conclusion was grim and undeniable. The Allies had rewritten the laws of war. The collapse of German morale. The Red Ball Express did not just move supplies. It crushed German confidence. For an army that had prided itself on precision, the sight and sound of American excess was unbearable. The endless convoys. Night after night, Wehrmacht soldiers heard it. The low growl of thousands of engines, headlights burning across the French countryside, convoys stretching to the horizon. Men wrote of an enemy who never stops arriving. Some swore they heard trucks even when none were present, phantom convoys that haunted the night. To many, the sound of logistics was worse than artillery, proof that no matter how many Americans they killed, more would come. Psychological warfare. American psychological operations exploited the fear. Loudspeakers broadcast recordings of truck engines into German lines, tricking them into believing more convoys were approaching. Reports flooded German command posts, continuous columns, thousands of vehicles, impossible to interdict. Morale plummeted. Soldiers with 3 rounds per rifle watched the enemy bring millions. Panzer crews without fuel watched Shermans fill up at roadside dumps. The psychological equation was brutal. Germans rationed, Americans wasted, and still had more. Testimonies of defeat. Captured officers gave voice to the despair. Oberst Hans von Luck, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule, waste fuel and vehicles, yet succeed through sheer volume." General der Panzertruppe Otto von Manschufel, when we realized you could supply armies faster than we could destroy them, the war was lost. Field Marshal Walter Model, we face not an army, but a superior civilization. The shattered illusion. For years, German propaganda had painted Americans as soft, decadent, incapable of fighting without machines. Yet here were those same Americans, black and white, exhausted, dirty, sometimes hallucinating from fatigue, driving themselves harder than Germans drove horses, and doing it voluntarily. It overturned everything the Wehrmacht believed about itself and about its enemy. The realization struck hardest at the officer corps. They were not simply being outfought on the battlefield, they were being outsupplied into irrelevance. The breaking point. By autumn 1944, German generals stopped laughing at American logistics. They had heard the truth with their own ears, the roar of 6,000 trucks grinding eastward without end. And in that sound they heard their own defeat. The wartime climax. By the fall of 1944, the Red Ball Express had become more than a supply line. It was a symbol of American abundance, of German despair, and of a new way of waging war. The operation peaks. From August 25th to November 16th, 1944, the Express ran without pause. 412,000 tons of supplies delivered. 122 million ton-miles covered. Nearly 6,000 trucks daily, 7,000 at peak. 23,000 drivers employed. 57 million gallons of fuel consumed. 5,000 vehicles lost to accidents, breakdowns, or destruction. Every figure dwarfed anything the Wehrmacht had ever imagined possible. German logisticians, reviewing the captured records after the war, admitted they had been wrong by a factor of 10. Battlefield results. The effect was unmistakable. Paris liberated in 1 week. Patton's tanks on the German border within a month. German divisions outgunned, outfueled, and outmaneuvered until 47 were rendered combat ineffective. The war in Europe shortened by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express, which cost about $100 million, paid for itself in a single day of save conflict. The sudden end. By November, railheads had been rebuilt. The Red Ball had lasted 82 days, far longer than its planners expected. Then, almost overnight, it vanished. Trucks reassigned. Routes reopened to civilians. Depots dismantled. The greatest motorized supply operation in history dissolved in 72 hours, leaving only ruts in French roads and memories of endless convoys. German testimony. At war's end, interrogated officers return again and again to the same point. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring asked what most surprised him about the Americans. Not your tanks, not your planes, not your ships. Your trucks. Von Rundstedt, after studying Red Ball reports. They have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. We are fighting the last war. Von Manschufel, in 1945. When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could replace faster than we could destroy. The final judgment. For all their brilliance in tactics, the German generals' admitted defeat came not at the hands of Allied tanks or bombers, but through the relentless hum of 6,000 engines. As one anonymous officer told a captured Red Ball driver in Belgium, "We prepared for your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks." The laughter that had greeted American logistics in 1944 had fallen silent. By May 1945, those same generals signed surrender papers, beaten not just by firepower, but by the roar of trucks that never stopped. Legacy of the Red Ball Express. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944. The trucks rolled off the one-way highways, the depots emptied, and the signs came down. But the impact of those 82 days stretched far beyond France. A logistics revolution. German officers studying the operation after the war admitted that it had rewritten the rules of mechanized warfare. The lessons were stark. Volume beats precision. Waste mattered less than speed. Redundancy equals resilience. Accept high failure rates. Overwhelm them with replacements. Decentralization drives momentum. Sergeants making field repairs achieved what German colonels planned for weeks. Logistics isn't support, it is strategy. By 1950, even former German Chief of Staff, Franz Halder, conceded. The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determines strategy, not the reverse. The Americans understood this. We learned too late. Birth of modern trucking. When the war ended, thousands of Red Ball veterans went home with unmatched experience. They had run the largest highway system on Earth. Many became pioneers of the American trucking industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were seeded by veterans who had learned in France that if you keep trucks moving 24 hours a day, you can move the world. Their lessons also shaped infrastructure. The U.S. interstate highway system, championed by President Eisenhower in the 1950s, owed much to what he had seen in France: convoys of trucks, unstoppable on dedicated routes, winning wars at 35 miles per hour. Seeds of desegregation. The greatest irony was racial. 3/4 of Red Ball drivers were African American, men who could not eat in white restaurants at home, who served in segregated units, yet whose labor made Patton's advance possible. Eisenhower himself, after visiting the convoys, recognized the contradiction. His aide recorded him saying, "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantryman. We must reconsider many things." The success of the Red Ball Express added weight to the growing push for desegregation. In 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the U.S. military. The drivers had proved in the fields of France what they already knew, that given the chance, they would match anyone. Recognition at last. For decades, the Red Ball Express remained overshadowed by D-Day and Patton's Dash. But in 1994, on the 50th anniversary of the operation, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp. Veterans gathered, many elderly, many black, and remember what they had done. One survivor put simply, "We weren't in the history books, but without us, there wouldn't have been a history to write." The final lesson. The Red Ball Express taught the world that in modern war, logistics is not support, it is the fight. Trucks, not tanks, decide campaigns. Factories, not field maneuvers, determine outcomes. And sometimes, history turns not on the flash of bayonets, but on the steady grind of engines, carrying supplies mile after mile, until the enemy collapses from scarcity. The German generals who laughed at American logistics learned that truth the hard way. And the men who drove through exhaustion, prejudice, and danger left behind a legacy bigger than any battlefield victory. They proved that determination behind the wheel could change the course of history.